Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. Today's video is honestly one of those ones where I was looking to talk about something new from the season. A little bit tricky now in this time period, considering that we only really get the weekly Veil transcripts to keep us going, but I figured that there was still some exotic armor stuff in the lore this season that I hadn't covered, so I went ahead and took a look at it, and, well, yeah, not all of it's that good actually, at least I don't think. Today's video wasn't going to be a critique or a discussion, but as I was writing the script it really morphed into one, because I looked at some of this armor and I asked myself, does this matter? And I don't think that some of it does. So yeah, today we're looking at exotics, armor in particular, their lore, and why some of it just plainly doesn't work for me anymore. But first, let's take a moment to talk about the sponsor of today's video, Factor. I think it's fair to say that eating healthily and just getting your diet right is hard. Yeah, sure, it's great, you work all day, you come home, you've done your thing, but at the end of all of that you're tired and the last thing you want to do is meal prep. Takeout is really tempting, but also not necessarily going to be the greatest of foods. I mean, look, it's a great idea in the moment, but let me tell you, when the kebab does arrive at God knows what hour of the night, I'm going to be sitting there and I'm going to be regretting it. However, you don't have to. And that's all thanks to Factor meal kits, which help remove all the stress from meal prep and help you reclaim some time for yourself. Factor meal kits offer nutritious solutions to your prep woes and can help you achieve your goals for better nutrition. They have keto, vegan, and vegetarian options, as well as over 27 different meals available every week with their meal kits, and so there's no shortage of stuff to try. And for those of us hardcore gamers out there with only a few moments to spare between Grandmaster Nightfall rotations, don't worry. Go ahead and grab Factor's prepared smoothies, keto shakes, or just quick snacks, and you can prep each of them in just 2 minutes. With convenience, variety, and nutrition in hand, you might be wondering about the price, and lucky for you all, I have just the thing. Use my link or go to go.factor75.com and use code POGBIFEJUL50 for 50% off your first box. Once you click, my description will live update to count up the purchases. Thanks again to Factor for sponsoring this video. Anyway, back to the video. Now, let's be really clear before we start this. Exotics generally, they have the potential to be utterly fascinating as far as their lore and story is concerned. This is especially true for weapons in Destiny, given that lots of them have their own mythology, and the identity of a weapon is as in tune with its story as it is with actually shooting the thing. Weapons are a very personal thing, armor often isn't. But it's not to say that armor isn't something that can have its own stories. Even though weapons do stick out more, there are potentially great armor pieces that have stories attached to them too. I mean, some of the exotic armor pieces that we have are so legendary that characters attached to them have become beloved within Destiny. The prime example I can think of is Saint 14, a prime example because of the strength of his own mythology. But then there are definitely some others that really stand out to me on a story basis alone. I mean, take a look at Necrotic Grips. It's not only a great exotic in terms of its function, which absolutely changes your playstyle and makes a different kind of build for you, but it's also a really cool, menacing new take on the story of Thorn and the Weapons of Sorrow, linking it in with Osteostriga, some Vanguard research that went horribly wrong, and an obsessed researcher who now calls these Weapons of Sorrow her children. So yeah, that in itself is a really great example of how one armor piece can link in with other bits and pieces of the story and create this vivid intersection between old lore and new story that pushes things forward. These exotics expand the world and have cool story beats all of their own, and honestly, that's where the bar for me is for exotic armor lore nowadays. They don't all have to be like these, but every time I see an exotic that does create a cool attached story, and creates a legendary character or helps to enhance or tell new stories around them, things like Felwinter's Helm, Citan's Ramparts, Arthurus' Embrace, Swarmers, Chitorachne's Facade, or even the 3 Worm God exotics from Warmind, all of these remind me about something important in Destiny's lore, which is that Destiny is a world that is evolving without me and is building alongside all of the stuff that I'm doing. Like, yeah, sure, I'm a big actor in the world of Destiny as the Guardian, and I may be carving out a path of my own through the story or the seasonal content, doing all the raids and nightfalls or exploring the world, but there's also a massive world out there that's expanding narratively in scope alongside me, independently of me. There are other Guardians out there, other entities in the universe, friends and foe, all of them experiencing something different, and in some cases, exotics can be a cool window into those parts of the universe of Destiny. Again, this isn't the only way for exotic lore to be good though. There are others that provide important context and notes and understandings about the world at large. Off the top of my head, take a look at Osmiomancy gloves, which provide important lore and context on the nature of the Taken and the goals of the Witness and Oryx, the Taken King. Hoarfrost Z, the Titan exotic chest, gave us an insight into what some of the people of the Last City were feeling about the existence of Hive Guardians and the actions of ghosts that joined them. This was really important because it gave us context as to the nature of the city and what's going on in it right now. And if we aren't defending the city, then what are we doing? And then take a look at the Hunter exotics. You've got things like Raiju's Harness, which is one of several exotics that seem to imply that the literal elements of Destiny, like arc lightning, are somehow filled with life and purpose. These exotics also have their place because they expand the universe and make it more interesting. Some exotic lore isn't particularly revelatory, on the other hand, but is still got a place for different reasons. Namely, it can be because it's a fun bit of meta commentary. Off the top of my head as a warlock, I think of Phoenix Protocol and how its entire lore tab is basically just a big commentary on how Well of Radiance, the super, is stepping on the toes of Bubble Titans, and it's really good fun. But so is Sunbracers, which of course back in D1 were called Sunbreakers. The lore here states that their original bearer, the one who started wearing them first, actually refused to call them Sunbreakers anymore because they didn't want any beef with the Sunbreaker Titan mercenary group. It also states that their creator, who gifted them to their original bearer, decided that in spite of that danger they would continue to call them Sunbreakers regardless, because to them, they always would be Sunbreakers. That sentiment is kind of reflective of what some D1 veterans might have thought. All of these kinds of exotics, for one reason or another, have their place in the lore and the overall story of Destiny. They broaden it, or they deepen it, or they make it feel more alive, or just more entertaining. But I do hate to say it, there are some exotic armor pieces, particularly from this season, that just didn't do it for me. Now again, to be really clear, not every piece of armor needs to be some revelatory thing that pushes a big plot point forward. Not every armor piece needs to invoke its own little subplot like necrotic grips. But some of these lore entries could do a much better job at just expanding the lore of the world, or just, I don't mean to be harsh, but talking about stuff that's more interesting. I thought back into the times of Destiny 1 for some of the process of making this video and writing this script, when the game was all still fresh in my mind and I had just started to experience it for the first time, and I asked myself, if I was looking at the new seasonal exotics, whether I would have really wanted to learn more about Destiny, and whether I learned something important from them if I'd read those exotics and that was my first ever experience of the lore. And I have to say that, well, if I was reading those for the first time, I don't think I would have been too inspired, except by one of them, which I'll get onto in a second. Now, granted, the whole D1 thing and back in the old days of Destiny 1 is still not a perfect comparison, because back in D1, exotics only had flavor text, so their quote-unquote lore was really threadbare, but they could still, in the best of times, evoke a childlike wonder and an insatiable fascination with the world I was interacting with. So, do some of these new exotics from this season do that for me? Well, again, not all the time. Cenotaph Mask might make some fascinating hooks to pull on as far as future plot points around the Pyramid ships are concerned, but the Hunter and Titan exotics, the Triton Vice and Arbor Warden, they just didn't do it for me. Helm of Saint 14 tier, these exotics just are not, and like I've said, they don't have to be good every time. They don't even need to follow some kind of thing where they make a revelatory moment for a character in particular. But I think it's fair to say that these exotics, as well as a few others, don't necessarily do the greatest job of expanding the universe of Destiny all that much. At least, not in a way that's interesting. To put it really simply, the one-sentence summary of each exotic is this. The Triton Vice is a conversation between two guardians on how everything in existence does or doesn't seem to converge on the general structure and look of crabs. Arbor Warden is about a guardian killing an acolyte and finding a plant that's been preserved from the Golden Age, which they think is lucky. Cenotaph Mask is about how a guardian is posted up as part of an expedition inside what might well be Rulk's pyramid ship and might have been killed or vanished by some kind of unknown threat as the walls of the ship literally closed in on them. Now, I don't want to make any assumptions here, but I'm pretty sure that a fair few of you will have seen which of those is the odd one out, because two of them are not exactly revelatory stories, and one of them is. Yeah, sure, crap's funny, but it's not really that funny when you read it, if I'm being completely honest. And granted, humor is entirely subjective, so maybe I'm missing the point on that one. But I'm really focusing on Arbor Warden here, if I'm going to take a look at things, because this didn't land with me at all. Now, to be clear, they do both make their fine lore references, sure, but I just don't think they expand the story of Destiny a ton, and I don't think they're really effective mechanisms for keeping players interesting, or really showing everyone the most interesting parts of this game. It's all very well that Arbor Warden shows that they grew plants back in the Golden Age on Titan using hydroponics, and that the world is still being haunted by Xivu Arath's influence, but I mean, we all kind of already knew that, and it's not really that interesting to us. It's much more interesting seeing that as part of the main seasonal story, where we're seeing characters actively being corrupted and abducted and fought by Xivu, but I mean, this is, at the end of the day, not about that. It doesn't have that scale. The Arbor Warden exotic is really just a story about a guy killing an acolyte for a plant. On the other side of things, for hunters, it's all very well that the Triton Vice makes commentary about how one hunter goes to ask Variks about how big an Eliksni can get, something which their colleague immediately tries to stop them doing, but does that really make Destiny's universe that much more interesting? I don't think it does. It's kind of different because when the Drifter sits there and makes the whole crab cakes joke about Eido, that's put in the context of humor and character development, and that's actually funny because you can hear the tone in Drifter's voice and you can hear him saying it. In this instance, it sounds as though it doesn't carry tone, it doesn't sound of anything at all because it's just text. So I don't think it lands as well. The point of the humor might still be there, and I'm sure to some people it is funny, but to me it just really wasn't. It didn't resonate with much of anything. And again, a lot of this may end up being personal preference on my part here, but when one of these lore tabs can be boiled down to a guy found a plant, I don't think that cuts the mustard for what exotic lore can and perhaps should be. And again, let's be really clear about this. These are clearly moments where the future lore can refer back to these moments and make what is mundane at the time seem way bigger after the fact. A prime example of this is Telesto and the Sealed Ahamkara's Grasps, which got a whole lot more meaning and attention after Forsaken released, which they totally foreshadowed, by the way. It's entirely possible that later on we'll find out that the plant in Arbor Warden is a cutting from something special. I don't know, I'd love it if they expanded on this and told us that yeah, this is actually some flora from the Black Garden, or a cutting of the Tree of Silver Wings or something. But for the moment, we don't have that context in the lore, and it really just feels like this lore doesn't need to be there. Like, why is it important? Again, hindsight may well prove me wrong, Lord knows it has done so before, but these stories need more love, I think. For example, let's take an exotic that's all apparently powered as a MacGuffin, just like Arbor Warden is. At least, I presume that the plant is what made the exotic exotic. Anyway, our other MacGuffin exotic, which I think is done well, is Synthoceps, and it's not a very long lore tab. It's short, but it is interesting, because it basically talks about what the Synthoceps are, and it describes how they're a symbiotic organism that bonds to their host, showing loyalty and almost a sense of affection towards them, whilst reacting with incredible hostility to any perceived threats, thus greatly increasing the host's power. The very existence of a symbiotic life form is a pretty cool concept, and also it just so happens to explain the power of the exotic as well as its form, function, and honestly, all the things about its aesthetic then start to make a lot more sense. The Synthoceps exotic expands the lore that comes with it by virtue of its own mechanics and the writing of the lore tab. Compare this to Arbor Warden, and it should be like this. Arbor Warden gives Titans one of the most unique abilities in the entire Titan arsenal. You can punch a grenade and turn it into a barricade. That's cool. There should be some story stuff behind it. But I couldn't possibly tell you why or how that's related to some Golden Age flower cuttings, because the lore doesn't tell me. And you know what? It should. I want to know why I can punch a grenade and put a barricade in it. Like, that's the most Titan thing ever. Again, there is potential for all of this to be explained later on, and there's potentially a reason why all these things are so powerful. Again, I'll say it one more time. Imagine if a Golden Age team somehow managed to get clippings of a Tree of Silver Wings or a plant from the Black Garden. Again, I don't even know if those two things are possible, but let's entertain the concept for a moment. Imagine the act of creating the barricades, and imagine that it's a unique interaction between that plant clipping and the Guardian's light. That raises questions. Does the plant specifically amplify paracausal abilities? Does it have paracausal powers of its own? It's entirely possible that this is how it works, but the moment of discovering the plant is the focus of the lore tab, as best we know, not what the plant does. That's what the lore is written about. As far as I know, it's still just a plant. And the only reason I'm asking why it can even do that is because I'm laboring this point, not because the lore was explained by the lore entry in the lore tab to me. It's not here. And yeah, you could make some assumptions, I'm sure, but I feel like that's where the interesting story lies, you know? If you're going to sit there and show me that this exotic allows you to punch a grenade and punch the barricade into the grenade and throw the grenade and make a barricade with it, that's awesome. I want to hear about that. I don't want to necessarily hear that you fought an acolyte for it. Have you any idea how many acolytes I've killed? I'm the lore guy. I, generally speaking, am not doing all of the hardcore PvE content all of the time. I jump into raids on day one, sure, but like, do you have any idea how many acolytes I've killed? Like, I've killed well over 1 million enemies in Destiny. Acolytes easily make up like 100,000 of those, if not more. So, yeah, not interesting as far as I'm concerned. I've gone on quite a little bit here, but I think my message to Bungie as far as critique is concerned on this is simply this. It isn't to stop doing exotic lore or even to stop doing it in the varied way that it's being done. I think it's more that whenever one of these build-defining top-tier pieces of gear drops for a player, it should be something that helps to add richness into Destiny's narrative and world in a way that is meaningful to the player. There are a lot of ways to do this, from creating legends like Saint 14 to showing us the meaningful extensions to stories in the universe like the Necrotic Grips, to the fun meta commentary like Phoenix Protocol, to the fourth wall breaking stuff even, like the Skull of Dire Ahamkara, and even down to just simply explaining some more interesting concepts that might not necessarily go within players' normal knowledge, like the Osmiomancy gloves. And again, I don't want to go ahead and make this commentary without acknowledging that to the developers I'm sure this sounds condescending as all hell, because I'm sure that that is the objective when it comes to exotic armor in the first place. You don't want to write a lore that isn't interesting. However, I think it's worth adding this little bit of additional context to my critique, which is simply that in the future, whenever an exotic armor piece comes out, I'm going to be asking two questions now. When it comes to the lore of it at least. The first of these questions is this lore talking about a cool topic or character, or something that's interesting about Destiny? And the second is this something that expands the universe of Destiny in some way? AKA, does it teach us something about the world, or does it expand our understanding of how it functions? Does it add a new element to the narrative that we hadn't considered before? Now again, a lot of that is all going to be personal preference, but for me the Triton Vice and Arbor Warden don't pass these two metaphorical smell tests. Cenotaph Mask, on the other hand, it feels like it's got something more to it, so let's finish off by reading and talking about that one just a little bit. The lore tab is as follows. You carry the names of the dead. Access restricted. Decryption key 45R3431V58PE1112. Hidden agent. Redacted. RE Pyramid exhibits. 0930. Signal still coming through strong. Initiating log. 0931. The rest of the team is continuing to formulate a means of analyzing the pyramid's composition. Chert and I have set up shop near our point of entry in the first gallery. 0934. Thus far, we haven't been able to establish any common element between the specimens in these chambers. That is beyond the fact that someone, something, decided they were worth putting under glass. It's an impressively broad collection, as morbid trophies go. 0940. Looking at a horizontal cross-section, about 15 meters long, of a, let's call it a pseudo-mammal? Fibrous strands on the exterior, could be hair, some prime masticatory muscles. This thing had a mean bite. Data lost, unable to retrieve. Data lost, unable to retrieve. Error. Anyway, the interesting material is in the scans we're sending along. Chert is getting an energy signature off these remains. Biosigns, she says. Could be a ghost miscalculation, of course. That or the observer effect is taking a break. I'm looking right at this thing, and there is no way any part of it is still alive. Error. It's been preserved for... Error. Hey, Chert, was that wall always there? Error. Chert? So there are some assumptions we can draw from this lore tab, and they all lead to the idea that this hidden agent in the lore tab is very much dead. The name Cenotaph here implies a whole bunch, which I'll get into in a moment, but yeah, none of it looks good. What they may well have died at the hands of is unclear, but let's walk through the possibilities for a moment. This feels like it's definitely inside a pyramid ship, where hidden agents have taken the opportunity to set up a scouting and reconnaissance mission. The presence of a massive quote-unquote exhibit here makes me believe that this is actually Rhulk's sunken pyramid in Savathûn's throne world. Now, of course, that pyramid isn't the only one to have the cross-sections of specimens in the glass. We saw it on the Witness's own pyramid ship in Root of Nightmares, after all. However, I think it's clear that this is in the Throne World pyramid, especially when, for starters, one of the areas within the raid is called Exhibition. Rhulk's entire pyramid stash is laid out like a pyramid exhibit at a museum, and, well, yeah, some of the descriptions do actually match some of the areas within Rhulk's pyramid particularly. I'll take a swing here, go out on a limb, and say that this is almost certainly Rhulk's pyramid. Where the specific specimen in glass referenced in this lore tab isn't clear, but there are plenty of them around the pyramid, and potentially, if you look into the area just after you drop down into the pyramid, out of the Disciples' Bog, and into that massive drop space, you do see a massive cross-section of a worm just as you enter that second room, and this might be the specimen they're talking about. It is in fact something close to that size, if not maybe a bit longer, and more importantly, it's got the cross-sectional description down pat. The really interesting and terrifying thing about it all is that this lore entry implies that the worm within the glass, or maybe some of the other subjects within the pyramid's various strange icy sarcophagi, aren't actually dead. They might have actually woken up and killed the ghost and its guardian. The guardian didn't see where the ghost ended up disappearing, and it's not clear where their remains were. And it's also not clear where the Guardian's remains were. It's entirely possible that the audio transcripts were the only thing recovered here. After all, the ghost just went missing, and this entire thing has been redacted, which means the Hidden did not want this getting out. This might well explain the name of the exotic too, Cenotaph Mask, considering that a cenotaph is a memorial to someone who has died but is not buried at the location of the memorial itself. In other words, it is an empty grave. This mask might be the only thing that was left of them, and their remains might not have been found at all. None of this is easily confirmed given the nature of the message, but the areas of discussion here are riveting. Are the worms in the pyramid still stuck in the glass, or perhaps some of the strange worm hybrids that Rulk was creating? Are some of those things still alive? Is someone else or something else roaming the pyramid ships? Where did Chert and her guardian end up? Are we ever going to truly be safe inside one of those things? The presentation of the log as something found and recovered with all its corrupted data is interesting too, but the actual story itself also presents interesting ideas. It has blanks to be filled in, leaving tantalizing holes and questions that we need to answer at some point in the future. This isn't the most riveting of all lore tabs, but for me it satisfies at very least the first of my 2 requirements for an interesting lore tab on an exotic armor piece. It's a lore tab that's all about the pyramids, what's inside them, and the idea that at the heart of our enemies' operations, even when we've conquered their fortresses, they're still steeped in mystery and still very dangerous, and potentially there are things that are starting to wake up in the pyramid. That's worth talking about, and is interesting, which, for me, makes a good lore tab. Whilst it leaves more questions than answers as far as the story of what happened to the agent and their ghost are concerned, this does also do a little work to expand the mythos of Destiny, because it hints to us that there are forces within the pyramids that we still don't understand. The Hidden are investigating this pyramid in the course of their expedition. These notes were meant to be routine, mundane, and a study. They end up potentially being the penned last words of an unfortunate guardian. This reaches towards a point where it starts to satisfy point number 2 for me as well. The Cenotaph mask isn't even the best example of what I think good exotic armor lore can be, in my opinion, but at very least I think it's doing a much better job this season than Triton Vice and Arbor Warden. Again, all subjective. For the ultimate note about an exotic armor piece and the lore attached to it that has punched way above its weight, especially over time, an armor piece and some lore that has transcended the time in which it's created, look no further than Nezarek's Sin. From this one little lore tab came a weird enigma within the community's lore subconscious that was allowed to swell with questions and mystery for years. The community's speculation ran rampant, my own included. There were so many mysteries surrounding Nezarek that I originally didn't think he'd be allied to the Witness. I thought he was a third-party force. There were so many mysteries that expanded the idea of the lore of this particular character in the raid weapons when we did finally get to Root of Nightmares. And even before that, we had lore on Nezarek and little hints about what was going on with him in the seasons of the Plunder and the Haunted. All of this was enhanced because Nezarek had this sort of mythical presence in the lore, superseded only by the likes of characters such as Saint 14, Savathun, and Mara Sov, mainline characters who are in the narrative on a regular basis. This is what exotic armor lore can be at its best. It can create myth. But at times when you're talking about crabs, I don't think we can quite reach that same bar. So, yeah, the bar doesn't always need to be met, certainly, and you can do different things with exotics, but I feel like it's got to be just a bit more interesting than these. Again though, as with any of these videos, I'm not a game developer, and I don't know the process behind creating everything as is, and who knows what else needs to be done alongside all of this to make it work. Maybe you have your own thoughts and feedback, which you can leave in the comments section. Either way, to anyone who is a developer, I'm so sorry if this comes across as obvious, condescending, or just completely ridiculous for some other reason. Yet again, it's just one of those moments of, well, hey, I am a player, not a developer. I don't necessarily see it from that perspective. I merely hope that I can sit and offer feedback. All of that being said though, I hope that you watching this video enjoyed it, and if you did, go ahead and leave a like, and if you have your own thoughts again, the comment section is open, and if you want more Destiny lore content, go ahead and hit subscribe, and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Rodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.